Welcome back to Sean Thinking Out Loud. I'm Sean Armstrong. Today we're going to talk about something that makes people nervous because it sits right on the fault line between politics, psychology, culture, family, media, religion, social pressure, and personal responsibility. So naturally, everybody wants to handle it like cowards. The topic is the mental health gap between the left and the right. More specifically, we're going to talk about why studies keep finding that people who identify as liberal, progressive, or left wing often report worse mental health, more depression, more anxiety, and lower overall well being than conservatives. Now, before the professionally offended start hyperventilating into their ring lights, let's be clear. I'm not saying every leftist is mentally ill. I'm not saying every conservative is healthy. I'm not saying political ideology is the only reason someone struggles with anxiety, depression, loneliness, hopelessness, or emotional instability. Human beings are complicated. Annoyingly complicated. Mental health is shaped by biology, family history, trauma, poverty, social environment, personal habits, sleep, diet, substance use, faith, community, politics, and by about 9,000 other variables nobody wants to admit because simple answers are easier to sell. So no, this episode isn't a clinical diagnosis. This is a political and cultural argument. And the argument is simple. Certain modern left-wing habits create misery. A worldview that tells people they're permanently oppressed, permanently endangered, permanently traumatized, permanently guilty, permanently complicit, permanently fragile, and permanently surrounded by hidden systems of domination isn't a recipe for peace. It's a recipe for exhaustion. It's an emotional meat grinder. And the fact that some people call that compassion doesn't make it compassion. It makes it bad theology with a sociology degree. Over the last several years, researchers and commentators have been paying more attention to this pattern. A major study of American 12th graders found that depressive symptoms increased among adolescents after 2010, but the increase was especially sharp among liberal girls, particularly those from families with lower parental education. A Columbia Magazine article summarized that research bluntly. Depression has risen among teenagers across the board, but it rose most sharply among progressive students, especially liberal girls from low-income families. Other writers, including Musa al-Gharbi, have reviewed the broader evidence and argued that conservatives tend to report higher happiness, higher life satisfaction, and better well-being. But there's also a newer complication. A 2025 PLOS-1 study found that conservatives do rate their mental health more positively than liberals. But when researchers asked about overall mood instead of mental health, that gap largely disappeared. That matters, because it means some of the gap may come from different ways people answer questions. Conservatives may be less willing to admit mental health struggles because they see that language as weakness. Liberals may be more willing to describe themselves in mental health terms because mental health language is common in left-leaning spaces. So, if somebody wants the simple version, here it is. The gap is real in many surveys. The causes are disputed. The interpretation is contested. And anyone pretending this is clean, simple, and settled is either selling you ideology or trying to win an argument on social media without doing the work. But here's where the conversation gets useful. Even if some of the gap is reporting style, even if some conservatives underreport problems, even if some liberals are more open about mental distress, we still have to ask this. What kind of ideology teaches people to cope better? What kind of ideology teaches people to collapse? What kind of worldview gives people agency? What kind of worldview turns them into emotional hostages? Because the modern left has a problem. It doesn't just point out injustice. It builds identity around grievance. It doesn't just recognize suffering. It rewards suffering as moral status. It doesn't just critique institutions. It teaches people that institutions secretly control everything. Language is violence. Disagreement is harm. Normal life is oppression, and personal responsibility is suspicious because it sounds too much like blaming the victim. Then people wonder why the younger left looks anxious, lonely, angry, and miserable. Really? You taught them the world is a prison run by invisible villains, then acted shocked when they stopped smiling. That's not mystery, that's cause and effect wearing a pronoun pin. This episode will have 5 segments. In segment 1, we'll talk about the data nobody wants to say out loud. What do the studies actually suggest, and what should we not overclaim? In segment 2, we'll talk about grievance as a daily operating system. Because if your worldview trains you to scan the world for harm, you'll find harm everywhere. In segment 3, we'll talk about community, isolation, and the cult of purity. Conservatives often have churches, families, local networks, patriotic identity, and stable rituals. The modern left often has activist circles, online mobs, political tests, and cancellation threats. One of those is better for your nervous system. In segment 4, we'll talk about the doom machine, media, social media, and permanent emergency. If you consume outrage all day, don't act surprised when your brain starts living in a bunker. In segment 5, we'll talk about agency, responsibility, and the lesson nobody wants to hear. A person needs more than awareness. A person needs duties, limits, discipline, forgiveness, purpose, and people who will tell them the truth. Then we'll close with the bigger point. A society can't stay healthy if it teaches half its young to confuse despair with intelligence. And yes, I already know what some people will say, but Sean, maybe liberals are more depressed because they see the world more clearly. That's one possible argument. It's also a convenient way to turn misery into proof of enlightenment. Every cult in human history has some version of that trick. You suffer because you understand. Maybe. Or maybe you suffer because your ideology has trained you to stare at every problem on earth, take emotional ownership of it, of all of it, hate half your country, distrust your own civilization, reject inherited sources of meaning, and then sit alone in social media arguing with strangers who use anime avatars. Could go either way, I suppose. Let's get into it. Before we start segment 1, let me plug one of my books. If today's episode hits a nerve, go read The American Left, From Liberalism to Despotism. This book traces the American left's movement away from classical liberal ideas like individual rights, free speech, constitutional limits, and equal citizenship, and toward identity politics, bureaucratic control, cultural coercion, and ideological conformity. If you want to understand how liberalism became leftism and how leftism became moral authoritarianism wearing compassion like a cheap suit, that book was written for you. The American Left, From Liberalism to Despotism by Sean Armstrong. Available through the usual book platforms. Now let's talk about the data.
Every time I tried to stand, they pushed me down. Now I've had enough, can't take it all around. It's time to be strong, time to be clear. No more being used, it's time to repair. No more Mr. Nice Guy, I'm through. Time to stand up, let the world see. No more being weak, it's time to break. I'm done with the pain, I'll take my place.
Let's start with the first rule. Don't overclaim the data. That rule matters because this topic is a magnet for idiots. On one side, you have people who want to say, see, liberals are crazy. That's sloppy. On the other side, you have people who want to say, there's no pattern here at all, and anyone who notices it is hateful. That's also sloppy. And because this is the internet, both sides will say it with total confidence while understanding almost nothing. Here's the responsible version. Researchers have found repeated associations between political ideology and self-reported well-being. In many studies, conservatives report higher happiness, higher life satisfaction, and better mental health than liberals. That doesn't automatically prove conservatism causes happiness. It doesn't prove liberalism causes depression. It doesn't prove a conservative with 3 divorces, a drinking problem, and a Facebook feed full of Civil War memes is secretly thriving. It means there's a measurable pattern that needs explanation. That's all. But that's enough to talk about. The study that gets quoted often looked at American 12th graders from 2005 through 2018. That study used monitoring the future data, a large national data set. The researchers looked at political beliefs, sex, parental education, and several internalizing symptoms. Internalizing symptoms means problems that turn inward. Depressive affect, low self-esteem, self-derogation, loneliness, the kind of psychological trouble that doesn't always explode outward, but eats the person from the inside. The researchers found that depressive symptoms rose after 2010 across adolescent groups. That part matters. This isn't a story where only one political group got worse and everybody else was dancing through a field of psychological sunshine. Young people got worse overall. But the increase wasn't evenly distributed. Female liberal adolescents had the largest increase. Female liberal adolescents with lower parental education had especially high depressive affect scores. That's the part people notice, and they should notice it. Because if a particular ideological identity is associated with worse mental health trends, you don't protect people by pretending the pattern doesn't exist. You protect people by asking hard questions before more kids get dragged into the machine. Columbia Magazine later summarized the research and said the same basic thing. Depression has been rising among teenagers, but it has increased most sharply among progressive students, especially liberal girls from low-income families. That's not a conservative talk show host screaming into a camera. That's Columbia talking about Columbia-linked researchers. Which means the usual trick of dismissing the topic as right-wing propaganda doesn't work. So the next trick is to explain it away. One explanation is that liberals are more aware of injustice. They worry about climate change. They worry about racism. They worry about inequality. They worry about gun violence. They worry about identity-based harm. They worry about democracy. They worry about every national crisis, every global crisis, every institutional failure, and every moral stain they can absorb from a glowing rectangle. That explanation may be partly true. It's also not the defense people think it is. Because if your worldview makes you more aware of problems but less capable of functioning, that's not automatically wisdom. A smoke detector that screams all day, every day, even when there's no fire, is not a better smoke detector. It's broken. And if there's a fire, it still has to help you survive. It can't just make noise until everybody panics. This is where the conservative advantage may show up. Conservative ideology, at its best, gives people a structure. Family matters. Faith matters. Tradition matters. Country matters. Duty matters, your choices matter, your behavior matters, your obligations matter, your ancestors were not all stupid, your civilization isn't just a crime scene, your life is not defined entirely by oppression, you're not helpless. You're not a passive object being pushed around by systems. You're a person with agency. That matters. Agency isn't magic. It doesn't cure depression. It doesn't pay your bills. It doesn't make grief disappear. But agency gives you a way to stand up. It tells you there's something you can do. Get your house in order. Show up for your family. Clean your room, as Jordan Peterson would say. Go to church. Go to work. Train. Serve. Build. Save money. Tell the truth. Control what you can control. Stop pretending the entire universe owes you an apology before you can function. That kind of message can protect people. Not perfectly, but meaningfully. The modern left often sends the opposite message. It tells people their suffering is political. Their anxiety is political. Their loneliness is political. Their body image is political. Their family tension is political. Their workplace frustration is political. Their romantic failure is political. Their unhappiness is political. Their identity is political. Their speech is political. Their silence is political. Their hobbies are political. Their food is political. Their haircut is probably political too, because apparently we ran out of adult supervision. Now imagine being 16 years old and hearing that all day. Imagine being told that the world is full of hidden violence, hidden racism, hidden sexism, hidden transphobia, hidden colonialism, hidden privilege, hidden oppression, hidden microaggressions, hidden trauma, hidden systems, hidden structures, hidden power. Then imagine being told you're morally responsible for noticing all of it. And if you fail to notice it, you're part of the problem. And if you question any of it, you're dangerous. And if you laugh at it, you're cruel. And if you get tired, that fatigue is also political. That's not education, that's anxiety programming. The evidence doesn't allow us to say every leftist is miserable because of ideology. But it absolutely allows us to ask whether certain ideological habits increase despair. That's the real issue. Not party labels, not bumper stickers. Not whether somebody voted Democrat or Republican in the last election. The issue is worldview. Does your worldview tell you life has meaning, duties, limits, and possibilities? Or does it tell you life is a permanent emergency controlled by villains you can't defeat? Now add one more complication. The 2025 PLOS-1 study, that study found conservatives do rate their mental health better. But when researchers changed the wording and asked people about their overall mood, the gap disappeared. That's important because it suggests part of the mental health gap may be about language. Conservatives may hear mental health and think, I'm fine, stop whining. Liberals may hear mental health and think, let me open the full filing cabinet of everything wrong with me. That doesn't mean either side is lying. It means they may be using different cultural scripts. Conservatives may underreport mental health problems because they don't like the category. Liberals may over-identify with mental health language because their culture gives them vocabulary, status, and community around distress. That's a serious point. But even that complication supports part of my argument. Because if one side has built an entire culture around therapeutic language, trauma language, harm language, identity language, fragility language, and diagnosis language, then maybe that culture isn't simply measuring distress. Maybe it's producing some of it. Human beings become fluent in the language they're taught. If you teach young people to describe every discomfort as harm, every disagreement as trauma, every insult as violence, and every setback as oppression, you shouldn't be shocked when they become less resilient. Words train perception. Perception trains emotion. Emotion trains behavior. Behavior becomes identity. That's how a culture builds a person. So no, the data isn't a club to beat every liberal over the head. That would be stupid. The data is a warning flare. And the warning says this: something in modern life is damaging young people. Something in modern progressive culture may be making that damage worse. And pretending not to see it because the conclusion is politically inconvenient isn't compassion. It's cowardice. Now let's talk about the machine inside the ideology. Modern left-wing politics doesn't just offer policy views. It offers a way of interpreting reality. And that interpretation is often built around grievance. Some grievance is legitimate. There's real injustice in the world. There are bad laws. There are corrupt institutions, there are abusive people, there are historical crimes, there are unequal outcomes caused by bad policy, bad culture, bad luck, bad incentives, and sometimes plain human cruelty. A serious adult can admit that. The problem isn't noticing injustice. The problem is turning grievance into your daily operating system. When grievance becomes the operating system, the person stops asking, "What happened?" They start asking, "Who oppressed me?" They stop asking, "What can I do?" They start asking, "Which system is responsible?" They stop asking, "How do I become stronger?" They start asking, "Who needs to validate my harm?" They stop asking, "What's true?" They start asking, "What narrative protects my identity?" That's where ideology becomes poison. A healthy person needs the ability to distinguish between suffering and oppression. Those aren't always the same thing. You can suffer because someone wronged you. You can suffer because you made bad choices. You can suffer because life is hard. You can suffer because your body fails. You can suffer because someone dies. You can suffer because your marriage collapses. You can suffer because your parents were a mess. You can suffer because you were immature, arrogant, lazy, reckless, naive, or unlucky. Life has range. It's not all systemic oppression. Sometimes life just punches you in the mouth because life isn't your guidance counselor. But the modern left has trained a lot of people to interpret ordinary suffering through political categories. If you're anxious, maybe capitalism did it. If you're lonely, maybe patriarchy did it. If you're broke, maybe systemic inequality did it. If your relationship fails, maybe toxic masculinity did it. If someone criticizes you, maybe they committed harm. If someone disagrees with you, maybe they made the space unsafe. If you're unhappy, maybe society failed to affirm you hard enough. That kind of thinking feels compassionate at first. It removes blame. It tells the hurting person, this isn't your fault. Sometimes that's true, but if that's the only message, it becomes a trap, because the same message that removes blame can also remove power. A person who's never responsible is also never capable. Responsibility isn't just burden. Responsibility is authority over your own life. If nothing is your fault, then nothing is in your control. If nothing is in your control, then you're helpless. If you're helpless, despair makes sense. That's the emotional logic of modern grievance politics. It gives people explanations that feel morally satisfying, but leave them weaker. This is where conservative thinking has an advantage, not because conservatives are always wise. Plenty of conservatives are fools. Some of them couldn't organize a 2-car funeral procession without blaming the deep state. But traditional conservative habits often push people back toward agency. Your family matters, your choices matter, your work matters, your faith matters, your discipline matters, your habits matter, your word matters, your obligations matter, your community matters. That doesn't solve everything, but it gives you a ladder. Grievance gives you a mirror. And if all you do is stare into a mirror of your own wounds, you're not climbing out of anything. There's also a moral status problem. In many left-wing spaces, victimhood becomes currency. The more wounded you are, the more authority you get. The more marginalized identities you claim, the more moral standing you have. The more trauma language you use, the harder it becomes for anyone to challenge you without looking cruel. That creates perverse incentives. People learn to present themselves as fragile. They learn to narrate their lives through injury. They learn to compete for sympathy. They learn that resilience can look suspicious because resilience implies the wound doesn't control you. And in some circles, if the wound doesn't control you, then your politics may not be radical enough. that's sick, not clinically sick, spiritually sick. There's a difference between helping the wounded and rewarding woundedness as identity. A good culture helps people recover. A bad culture teaches people to decorate the cage. The modern left too often decorates the cage. It gives the cage a flag. It gives the cage academic language. It gives the cage a social media bio. It gives the cage a committee. Then it calls the cage liberation. The result is predictable. People become anxious because they're trained to scan for threats. They become depressed because they're told the world is permanently unjust. They become lonely because they're told disagreement is dangerous. They become angry because anger is treated as moral clarity. They become fragile because fragility is protected. They become performative because public morality becomes a survival strategy. And they become exhausted because no human nervous system was built to carry the emotional weight of every injustice on Earth. Climate change is a perfect example. You can believe climate change is real and still criticize the way climate politics is sold to young people. A child shouldn't be told the planet is ending every 5 minutes. A teenager shouldn't be taught that having children is immoral because of carbon. A college student shouldn't be trained to experience weather reports as apocalypse liturgy. A citizen should be informed. A citizen shouldn't be psychologically battered into despair. The same applies to race, sex, poverty, policing, immigration, war, and every other serious issue. You can teach hard truths without teaching helplessness. You can teach injustice without teaching hatred. You can teach history without teaching self-loathing. You can teach responsibility without teaching guilt as identity. The modern left often fails at that distinction. And when people on the right notice the misery, the left gets defensive. They say, we're depressed because we care. Maybe. But caring isn't measured by how miserable you are. Misery isn't virtue. Panic isn't wisdom. Despair is not proof of moral seriousness. If your compassion destroys your ability to live, love, build, serve, and endure, then your compassion needs discipline. Because undisciplined passion becomes emotional self-harm. That's a hard thing to say because people want their pain respected. Pain should be respected. But pain shouldn't be enthroned. Pain is a signal. It's not a king. When politics turns pain into authority, you get a culture run by wounds. And a culture run by wounds will eventually punish anyone who tries to heal. That's where we are. A lot of modern left-wing culture doesn't want healing. It wants permanent testimony. It wants people to keep confessing injury, privilege, guilt, complicity, trauma, exclusion, harm, and fear. Because the machine needs fuel. Healthy people are harder to control. Wounded people are easier to mobilize. That's why grievance politics is so dangerous. It doesn't just produce bad policy. It produces brittle people. People who can't hear disagreement, people who can't tolerate discomfort, people who can't separate criticism from abuse, people who can't accept reality unless reality first apologizes. That's not liberation, that's dependency. And dependency isn't mental health. Let me pause here and plug Dismantling the Republic, the role of progressive elites in America's descent into tribalism. That book is about what happens when citizenship gets replaced by tribal identity, when institutions stop serving the public and start managing factions, and when elites discover that a divided country is easier to control. If you want a bigger framework for how identity politics, bureaucratic power, and elite manipulation tear apart civic life, read Dismantling the Republic. It fits this episode because mental health isn't separate from civic health. A country that trains citizens to hate each other will eventually produce citizens who hate their own lives. Dismantling the Republic by Sean Armstrong. Now let's talk about people, because mental health doesn't happen in a vacuum. You can have good ideas and still fall apart if you're isolated. You can have a rough personality and survive if you have people around you who keep you grounded. Human beings need belonging. That's not weakness, that's biology. It's also common sense, which means we should expect modern politics to ignore it until everything breaks. One of the likely conservative advantages is community. Conservatives are more likely to be religious. They're more likely to value marriage and family. They're more likely to attach meaning to patriotism, tradition, local identity, and inherited obligations. Again, none of this makes every conservative healthy. Plenty of conservatives are lonely. Plenty are divorced. Plenty are addicted. Plenty are bitter. Plenty spend too much time online treating comment sections like combat deployments. But at the level of cultural structure, conservatism often preserves institutions that support mental resilience. Church, family, marriage, military service, volunteer groups, local civic life, holidays, ritual, shared memory, shared moral language. Those things matter. A person who goes to church every week isn't automatically better than anyone else, but that person has a place to go. A rhythm. A group of people who expect them to show up. A moral framework. A language for suffering. A place for grief. A place for confession. A place for service. A place where life isn't just self-expression and consumer choice. That's powerful. The modern secular left has often mocked those structures, weakened them, abandoned them, or replaced them with politics. And politics is a terrible substitute for religion. Politics can organize power. It can't forgive sin. It can't bury your mother. It can't sit with you in the hospital at 2 a.m. and tell you your life still has meaning. It can't raise your children. It can't make you humble. It can make you self-righteous. It's very good at that. But self-righteousness isn't peace. The left often says it has values community. But much of that it builds isn't community. It's ideological proximity. There's a difference. Community means people stay connected across disagreement, hardship, annoyance, age, temperament, and imperfection. Ideological proximity means you're accepted as long as you say the right things. Community forgives. Ideological proximity audits. Community corrects you because it wants you better. Ideological proximity exposes you because it wants status. Community can survive conflict. Ideological proximity treats conflict as contamination. This is why so many left-wing spaces become miserable. They're not built around shared life. They're built around shared policing. A conservative family gathering may involve arguments. It may involve bad jokes. It may involve Uncle Rick saying something that makes everyone stare at the potato salad. But people often still show up. There's blood. There's memory. There's duty. There's a sense that you don't throw people away because they voted wrong. In many left-wing circles, political disagreement becomes moral failure. And once disagreement becomes moral failure, relationships become fragile. You don't have friends. You have ideological probation officers. This is where cancel culture matters. Some people pretend cancel culture doesn't exist. That's adorable. Cancel culture isn't simply criticism. Criticism is normal. If you say something stupid in public, people are allowed to tell you it was stupid. Cancel culture is different. Cancel culture is the attempt to socially, professionally, and reputationally destroy people for violating ideological rules, often without proportion, context, mercy, or a path back. It creates fear, and fear destroys trust. If people are afraid that one wrong sentence can cost them friends, work, reputation, or belonging, they won't relax. They'll perform. They'll self-censor. They'll scan every room for danger. They'll start treating human conversation like a legal deposition. That's not good for mental health. The left loves the word safe. Safe spaces, safe language, safe classrooms, safe communities. But many of these spaces aren't safe. They're controlled. There's a difference. A safe place lets people speak honestly without fear of cruelty. A controlled place lets people speak only within approved boundaries. That may prevent conflict for a while, but it creates psychological pressure. People know when they're not free. Even if they agree with the rules, some part of them understands they're being watched. That kind of environment makes people anxious. It has to. This is one reason ideological diversity matters. If everyone around you thinks exactly like you may feel validated for a while. But you may also become weaker. You stop practicing disagreement. You stop learning how to tolerate offense. You stop learning how to persuade. You stop learning how to lose an argument without losing your identity. Then, when you encounter real disagreement, you experience it as violence. That's not because the disagreement is violence. It's because your tolerance muscles have atrophied. Modern left-wing spaces often create this problem. They promise inclusion, then they narrow acceptable opinion until everybody is walking on glass, and they call that progress. This is also why the language of chosen family can be both beautiful and dangerous. Some people need chosen family because their biological family was abusive, neglectful, or unsafe. That's real. No decent person should mock that. But if chosen family becomes code for only people who affirm me politically and emotionally, then it can become an echo chamber. A real family doesn't merely affirm you. A real family corrects you. A real family annoys you. A real family tells you when you're being an idiot. A real family forces you to deal with people who aren't custom built to validate your every preference. That can be irritating. It can also make you stronger. The modern left often replaces thick relationships with thin affiliations. Online communities, activist groups, identity groups, hashtag movements, political friend circles, mutual aid networks that sometimes do real good and sometimes collapse into drama faster than a middle school group project. These structures can help people, but they're often unstable. They depend heavily on ideological agreement. They can turn punitive quickly. And they often lack the long-term obligations that make traditional communities durable. A church can survive a disagreement. A family can survive a disagreement. A platoon can survive conflict because the mission still exists. But an activist circle built around moral purity may tear itself apart over a sentence. That's not community, that's a pressure cooker. Young people need adults. They need elders. They need mentors. They need people who have lived through divorce, grief, war, failure, financial stress, addiction, parenthood, death, betrayal, and recovery. They need people who can say, I know this feels like the end of the world, but it's not. Get up. The modern left too often gives young people peers instead of elders. It gives them influencers instead of mentors. It gives them therapists instead of grandparents. It gives them activist slogans instead of wisdom. It gives them diagnosis instead of discipline. It gives them validation instead of formation. No wonder they're anxious. A teenager can't raise a teenager. A peer group can't replace civilization. The right has its own failures. Some conservative families are cold. Some churches are hypocritical. Some communities protect abusers. Some people use personal responsibility as an excuse to abandon the vulnerable. That's real, and I'm not pretending otherwise. But the answer to bad community isn't no community. The answer to abusive authority isn't a life without authority. The answer to failed tradition isn't permanent rootlessness. A human being without roots becomes easier to manipulate. That's what we're watching. A lot of young people have been cut off from family, church, nation, history, and inherited moral language. Then politics moved in like a squatter. And now people wonder why they feel homeless. Here's the hard truth. You can't build stable mental health on unstable belonging. If your friends will abandon you over one wrong opinion, you're not in a community. You're in a compliance network. If your social group requires constant ideological performance, you're not loved, you're monitored. If your politics trains you to cut off everyone who disagrees with you, don't be shocked when you end up lonely. If your movement calls that liberation, your movement is lying to you. Now we get to the media. Because no discussion of anxiety, politics, and modern despair is complete without pointing out the glowing disaster brick everyone keeps in their pocket. The media environment is poison. And I don't mean only left-wing media. Right-wing media can poison people too. It can make people paranoid, furious, conspiratorial, and addicted to outrage. There are conservatives who can't enjoy breakfast unless someone on a screen tells them civilization is being murdered by a school board in Oregon. So this isn't a free pass for the right. But the left's doom machine has a particular flavor. It's built around moral emergency, climate emergency, democracy emergency, racism emergency, gender emergency, health emergency, speech emergency, disinformation emergency, extremism emergency. Every day is the last day. Every election is the last election. Every court decision is fascism. Every disagreement is harm. Every policy dispute is life or death. At some point, the human brain says, fine, I guess we live in hell now. News organizations know fear works. Fear gets clicks. Outrage gets engagement. Anger keeps people watching. Despair keeps people dependent. If the audience calms down, the audience logs off. And if the audience logs off, the ad money dries up. So the machine does what machines do. It feeds itself. It finds the most upsetting story. It frames it in the most emotionally charged way. It strips out the context. It adds moral pressure. Then it hands the audience a share button. Congratulations. You're now part of the distribution system. No uniform required. Social media made this worse. A person used to read the news, talk to neighbors, go to work, eat dinner, watch a game, go to church, visit family, or sit quietly. Now people wake up and immediately inject political panic into their bloodstream. Before breakfast, they have seen war footage, crime footage, climate panic, racial conflict, gender conflict, celebrity drama, economic fear, medical fear, and 27 strangers screaming about democracy. Then they wonder why they feel bad. This isn't a mystery. This is like drinking motor oil and blaming your stomach for lacking resilience. The left's relationship with social media is especially destructive because social media rewards the exact habits modern left-wing politics already encourages: public moral performance, call-outs, confession, shame, identity display, victim narratives, status competition, catastrophic framing, language policing, emotional exhibition. It's a perfect match. Like gasoline meeting a dumpster fire and deciding to start a graduate program. Take the concept of awareness. Awareness sounds good. Be aware of racism. Be aware of poverty. Be aware of abuse. Be aware of climate issues. Be aware of mental health. Be aware of war. Fine. Awareness is useful if it leads to sane action. But endless awareness without agency becomes torment. If you show someone 50 problems every day and give them no practical way to solve them, you're not educating them. You're overwhelming them. And overwhelmed people become anxious, numb, angry, or depressed. Sometimes all four. This is why doom scrolling is not just a bad habit. It's ideological conditioning. A person who doom scrolls long enough starts to believe the worst examples are the whole world. The worst cop becomes all cops. The worst man becomes all men. The worst white person becomes whiteness. The worst capitalist becomes capitalism. The worst Christians becomes Christianity. The worst conservative becomes all conservatives. The worst law becomes the entire system. Social media destroys proportion. And without proportion, you can't stay sane. Mental health requires scale. You need to know what's near you and what's far away. You need to know what's your duty and what's not. You need to know what you can fix and what you can only mourn. You need to know what's a crisis and what's merely unpleasant. You need to know the difference between danger and discomfort. The modern media environment erases those distinctions. Everything is immediate. Everything is personal. Everything is moral. Everything is urgent. That's not citizenship. That's a psychological warfare by notification. The left often adds guilt to the mix. It's not enough to know about a crisis. You have to perform concern. You have to post. You have to use the right words. You have to condemn. You have to amplify. You have to update your profile. You have to show solidarity. You have to prove you care. And if you don't, silence is violence. That phrase alone has probably done more damage to honest conversation than half the stupid slogans in modern politics. Silence isn't violence. Violence is violence. Silence may be cowardice. Silence may be wisdom. Silence may be ignorance. Silence may be exhaustion. Silence may be someone trying to feed their kids, bury their father, finish a shift, or avoid commenting on a subject they don't understand. But no, the activist class decided silence is violence because apparently words weren't dramatic enough. That kind of moral inflation creates anxiety. It makes ordinary people feel like they're always failing some public righteousness exam. And then there's harm. The left has inflated that word too. Harm used to mean damage. Now harm can mean disagreement, discomfort, satire, refusal to affirm, a book on a shelf, a speaker on a campus, a policy preference, a joke, a question, a statistic, or a facial expression interpreted by someone with too much free time. When everything is harm, people lose the ability to endure life. And life requires endurance. There's no adult life without discomfort. No marriage without discomfort. No job without discomfort. No education without discomfort. No friendship without discomfort. No citizenship without discomfort. If your politics defines discomfort as harm, it's training you for collapse. This is where the therapy culture overlaps with politics. Therapy can be good. Good therapy helps people face reality, process trauma, build coping skills, accept responsibility, and live better. Bad therapy culture does the opposite. It teaches people to pathologize normal discomfort, gives every unpleasant emotion a clinical-sounding label. It teaches people to set boundaries that are often just avoidance. It tells people to protect their peace when what they really need is to develop courage. It turns every family disagreement into trauma analysis. It turns ordinary selfishness into self-care. Then politics takes that language and weaponizes it. Now a political disagreement becomes unsafe. A hard question becomes emotional labor. A debate becomes violence. A different opinion becomes erasure. That's not mental health. This is emotional fragility protected by jargon. The media loves fragile people. Fragile people are easier to scare. Scared people are easier to mobilize. Mobilized people are easier to monetize. And the political class loves scared voters. A calm voter asks questions. A scared voter obeys. A calm citizen wants evidence. A scared citizen wants protection. A calm person can say, "This problem is real, but your solution is stupid." A scared person says, "Do something now." That's how fear becomes policy. That's how anxiety becomes power. The right needs to be careful here, because conservatives can become addicted to doom too. If your entire media diet is crime clips, border panic, government conspiracy, civil collapse predictions, and rage bait, you're not healthier because the logo is red instead of blue. You're just drinking a different brand of poison. But there's still a difference in the emotional teaching. Right-wing doom often internalizes anger. Left-wing doom often internalizes guilt, fear, and despair. Both can be ugly. But internalized despair is especially corrosive for young people. It teaches them the world is ending and they're complicit in the ending. That's a heavier burden for adults. It's abusive when aimed at children. If a 16-year-old girl spends every day online absorbing messages that she's oppressed, endangered, fragile, responsible for global suffering, complicit in historical evil, judged by impossible purity standards, and morally obligated to perform concern for every crisis, depression isn't surprising. It's predictable. That's not because she's weak. It's because adults built a machine that feeds her despair and then calls it awareness. Adults did that. Institutions did that. Media did that. Schools did that. Activist culture did that. And now everybody stands around with a clipboard asking why the kids aren't okay. Maybe because the adults poisoned the well and then sold branded water. This is a good place to mention The Unmaking of the American Citizen, Neoliberalism, Identity Politics, and the Conservative Renewal. That book deals with the transformation of citizens into managed demographic categories. Not neighbors, not countrymen, not responsible adults, categories. Voter blocks, identity groups, administrative objects. That matters because once people stop seeing themselves as citizens with duties and start seeing themselves as managed identities with grievances, civic life rots. If today's episode makes you think about what we've done to citizenship, read The Unmaking of the American Citizen by Sean Armstrong. Now we get to the part people will hate. The mental health conversation isn't just about services. It's not just about therapy access. It's not just about medication. It's not just about stigma. Those things matter, but they're not enough. The society also has to ask what kind of people it's forming. That question sounds old-fashioned because it is. Old-fashioned doesn't mean wrong. It often means it survived contact with reality. A healthy society teaches people how to suffer. That sounds harsh. Good. It should. Because suffering is coming whether your politics approves or not. You'll lose people. You'll fail. You'll be misunderstood. You'll be insulted. You'll be betrayed. You'll be rejected. You'll get sick. You'll age. You'll bury someone you love. You'll disappoint yourself. You'll discover that some dreams are dead. No ideology can repeal that. A sane culture prepares people for it. An insane culture teaches people that suffering is always proof someone wronged them. This is where agency matters. Agency is the belief that you can act. Not that you control everything. Not that life is fair. Not that effort always wins. Not that suffering is your fault. Agency means you're not merely acted upon. You can respond. You can choose. You can endure. You can build. You can repent. You can forgive. You can leave. You can stay. You can train. You can learn. You can serve. You can stop lying to yourself. That belief is essential for mental health. Without agency, people become passengers in their own lives. And passengers don't steer. Modern left-wing politics often weakens agency because it explains so much through systems. Systems matter. I'm not denying systems. Laws matter. Institutions matter. Economics matter. Culture matters. History matters. But if you teach people to see systems everywhere and agency nowhere, you train them to be helpless. A person can understand structural problems and still ask, what can I do today? That question is powerful. The left too often treats that question as insufficiently radical. The right should treat it as survival. When I was in the Army, nobody cared if the weather was unfair. Nobody cared if the terrain was unfair. Nobody cared if the enemy was unfair. Nobody cared if you were tired in a poetic way. The question was, what's the mission? What's the situation? What do we have? What do we need? And what are we doing next? That mindset isn't therapy, but it contains something mentally protective. It moves you from rumination to action. Rumination is when the mind circles the same pain over and over. Action breaks the loop. Not always completely. Not instantly, but enough to move, and movement matters. A lot of modern left-wing culture rewards rumination. It asks people to constantly examine identity, trauma, privilege, harm, oppression, language, positionality, guilt, and injury. Some reflection is useful. Endless reflection becomes self-consumption. You can stare at your wounds until they become your whole personality. At some point, healing requires attention to move outward, toward duty, toward service, toward work, toward other people, toward God, if you believe, toward your family, toward your body, toward reality. You can't heal by worshiping your own injury. This is one reason faith matters. Faith gives suffering a frame. Not an easy answer. A frame. Christianity doesn't say life will be painless. It says suffering is real, sin is real, death is real, evil is real, but none of those get the final word. That's psychologically powerful. A secular politics of grievance often gives suffering no redemption, only accusation. Who caused this? Who benefits? Who must confess? Who must be punished? That can identify real wrongdoing, but it can't save the soul. And yes, I said soul. People still have them, even if modern universities misfiled them under outdated concepts. Conservatism at its best preserves the moral ecology that mental health needs. Family, faith, nation, local community, personal responsibility, gratitude, duty, self-command, forgiveness, continuity with the past, obligation to the future. Those things don't guarantee happiness, but they give suffering somewhere to go. They give pain meaning. They give people roles. A father, a mother, a son, a daughter, a citizen, a soldier, a neighbor, a believer, a friend, a worker, a builder. Those roles stabilize people. Modern left-wing identity categories often destabilize people. They slice people thinner and thinner. Race, sex, gender, sexuality, class, disability, neurodivergence, privilege, oppression, intersection of intersections. Eventually the person isn't a person. They're a spreadsheet of grievances. That's no way to live. This doesn't mean conservatives should mock people with mental health struggles. That's lazy. If someone is depressed, anxious, suicidal, traumatized, or overwhelmed, the answer isn't toughen up, snowflake. That's not strength. That's stupidity wearing boots. Real strength knows when to be hard and when to be steady. A person in crisis needs help. They may need therapy. They may need medication. They may need a doctor. They may need a pastor. They may need a friend who checks in. They may need sleep, sunlight, exercise, structure, and less time online. They may need someone to sit beside them without turning their pain into politics. Do that. Be that person. But compassion doesn't require lying. And the lie we need to reject is that every form of validation helps. Some validation traps people. If a person says, I'm helpless, don't validate helplessness. If a person says, everyone who disagrees with me is dangerous, don't validate paranoia. If a person says, my identity means I can't be challenged, don't validate narcissism. If a person says, my pain gives me moral authority over reality, don't validate delusion. You can care about someone without agreeing with their worst interpretation of life. In fact, if you love them, you had better not agree with their worst interpretation of life. The right should offer a better mental health culture, not just mock the left's failure. Build alternatives, stronger families, better churches, better friendships, better local groups, better schools, better martial arts schools, better veteran networks, better fatherhood, better mentorship, better civic life. Teach young people how to argue without falling apart. Teach them how to lose without becoming victims. Teach them how to win without becoming arrogant. Teach them history without self-hatred. Teach them compassion without weakness. Teach them strength without cruelty. Teach them that duty isn't oppression. Teach them that limits aren't violence. Teach them that discomfort isn't trauma. Teach them that words aren't fists. Teach them that forgiveness isn't surrender. Teach them that gratitude isn't denial. Teach them that America is not perfect, but it's not a damn prison camp either. Because this is the final point. The modern left's mental health problem isn't just emotional. It's civilizational. A people taught to hate their country won't feel at home. A people taught to distrust family won't feel rooted. A people taught to reject faith will struggle with meaning. A people taught that identity is destiny will struggle with agency. A people taught that disagreement is harm will struggle with friendship. A people taught that history is only oppression will struggle with gratitude. A people taught that the future is only catastrophe will struggle with hope. This isn't complicated. If you remove the supports, the structure falls. Then intellectuals gather around the rubble and ask for grant money to study gravity. So what should a sane person do? First, stop feeding the doom machine. You don't need to consume every crisis. You're not morally required to be emotionally available to every tragedy on earth. Second, build real community. Not just people who agree with you. People who know you. People who can correct you. People who will still answer the phone when your life gets ugly. Third, recover duty. Do something useful every day. For your family, for your home, for your body, for your country, for your soul. Fourth, teach young people agency. Don't lie to them about hardship. Don't lie to them about injustice. But don't rob them of power by telling them the world is nothing but systems and traps. Fifth, tell the truth, even when it's ugly. especially when it's ugly, because lies may comfort people for a moment, but truth is the only ground strong enough to build on. The left says it wants compassion. Then it builds a culture that makes people anxious, isolated, fragile, guilty, and angry. That's not compassion. The right says it believes in responsibility. Then it needs to prove responsibility includes caring for people who are falling apart, not just laughing at them. Because if the left's mistake is turning pain into identity, the right's mistake is sometimes treating pain like weakness. Both are wrong. Pain is pain. The question is, what do you do with it? Do you build from it, or do you worship it? That's the dividing line. One more short plug before the outro. If this episode hit the theme of duty, moral structure, and civic sanity, read Reclaiming Our Ideals, The Importance of Foundational Principles in Today's Society. That book is about natural law, consent, property, virtue, marriage, moral order, and the principles a civilization needs if it wants citizens instead of emotional debris. Reclaiming Our Ideals by Sean Armstrong. Now let's close this thing out. Today we talked about the mental health gap between the left and the right. We talked about what the data suggests. We talked about what it doesn't prove. We talked about why young liberals, especially young liberal women, seem to show troubling mental health patterns in some research. We talked about grievance, doom, media, isolation, social punishment, fragile communities, and the loss of agency. And we talked about the bigger issue. A worldview has consequences. Ideas aren't just things people argue about online. Ideas train emotions. Ideas train habits. Ideas train families. Ideas train institutions. Ideas train children. If you teach people that they're helpless, they'll become helpless. If you teach people that disagreement is danger, they become afraid. If you teach people that suffering is identity, they cling to suffering. If you teach people that their country is evil, they feel homeless. If you teach people that personal responsibility is oppression, they lose the very tool that could help them stand up. That's what we're seeing. Again, this isn't about mocking mental illness. I have no interest in that. Real depression is brutal. Real anxiety can crush people. Trauma is real. Grief is real. Loneliness is real. People need help. But help has to be honest. And honest help doesn't flatter destructive thinking. Honest help doesn't tell people every fear is wisdom. Honest help doesn't tell people every wound is identity. Honest help doesn't tell people the world must change before they can take one step forward. Sometimes the most compassionate thing we can say is, "You're not helpless. You're not your pain. You're not your political category. You're not your diagnosis. You're not your worst day. You're responsible for what you do next." That message offends modern left-wing culture because modern left-wing culture has confused responsibility with cruelty. But responsibility isn't cruelty. Responsibility is the beginning of power. If you can respond, you're not defeated. If you can choose, you're not owned. If you can act, you're not merely a victim. That's the lesson. And it's a lesson too many institutions are afraid to teach. The left has spent years telling people that the world is oppressive, speech is dangerous, identity is destiny, disagreement is harm, and emotional fragility is moral authority. Then the same people act confused when the young come out anxious and depressed. There's nothing confusing about it. You can't feed people despair and expect them to grow hope. You can't train people in grievance and expect gratitude. You can't destroy roots and expect stability. You can't replace faith, family, nation, duty, and community with hashtags and expect mental health. That's not how people work. That's not how civilization works. That's not how anything works. So here's the final hammer blow. If your politics requires people to remain wounded in order to remain loyal, your politics isn't liberation. It's ownership. If your movement needs people anxious, guilty, isolated, and afraid, your movement isn't healing them. It's using them. And if your ideology can't produce resilient people, strong families, honest communities, grateful citizens, and young people who want to live, build, marry, serve, create, and endure, then your ideology has failed, no matter how compassionate it sounds. This has been Sean Thinking Out Loud. I'm Sean Armstrong. Turn off the doom machine. Call your family. Build something useful. And stop mistaking despair for intelligence.